Following the latest public declarations and the first official removal signed by Pope Leo XIV, a real earthquake has been unleashed in certain ecclesiastical circles. There are those who speak of an epochal turning point, those who fear a restoration, those who observe in silence, and those who are beginning to tremble. But behind the gestures and words of the new pontiff, there is much more moving than it seems. Stay until the end. Some details are escaping many, but not those who know where to look. The pontificate of Pope Leo XIV officially began with a solemn Mass celebrated in St. Peter's Basilica. Rome provided the backdrop for a liturgy full of symbolism, but it was the new pontiff's homily that hit the mark, offering the faithful not a generic speech, but a clear and unhesitating declaration of intent. Two key words repeated several times: unity and love. Pronounced not as slogans, but as precise guidelines of a pontificate that seems to want to definitively archive the ambiguity and confusion that have marked recent years. Pope Leo did not want to build an image of himself as an innovator or reformer. On the contrary, he presented himself as a servant of the faith of the people of God, not a legislator of a new doctrine, but the custodian of an ancient heritage, received, not invented. He spoke clearly. Christ did not ask Peter to be an isolated leader, but to confirm the brothers in the faith and keep them united in the truth. And unity, he emphasized, cannot exist without love. But a love that is not a vague feeling, but rather fidelity to the word and to tradition. A love that, as St. Paul recalled, is the stock that holds the entire structure firmly together. Shortly after the candles were extinguished following the inauguration Mass, his first concrete decision came: the removal of Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia from his position as Grand Chancellor of the John Paul II Institute. In his place, Cardinal Baldassare Reina was appointed, a discreet figure but with a solid reputation among those who pay attention to doctrinal fidelity and the centrality of human life in theological reflection. This appointment immediately aroused the interest of observers because Paglia had been one of the architects of the profound revision of the Institute that took place under the previous pontificate. From 2016 onwards, we had witnessed a real reconfiguration. Out went the professors who defended the classical vision of Catholic morality. In came new professors who were more open to reviewing, in a spirit of updating central bioethical and anthropological questions. Some positions that emerged within the Institute had raised doubts among believers and scholars. There had been growing ease in speaking of new forms of affection, of the possibility of rereading the structure of the family in a more inclusive way, and even of a pastoral rereading of practices once considered incompatible with the evangelical message. Paglia himself has become a controversial figure over time. His statements on extremely sensitive issues, such as the end of life or morally controversial medical therapies, have often generated confusion. Even more controversial are some episodes related to his management and public communication, including an artistic choice in his diocese that caused an international outcry due to visual contents judged by many to be inconsistent with ecclesiastical sobriety. Added to this are rumors that have never been fully clarified about funds intended for charitable activities that were used for very different purposes. While remaining head of the Pontifical Academy for Life, Paglia's departure from one of the symbolic institutions of moral teaching marks an important reversal. It is difficult not to read in this gesture a desire on the part of Pope Leo XIV to restore a sense of doctrinal coherence, especially on those issues that touch on the truth of man and his relational vocation. In his first meeting with the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, Pope Leo XIV pronounced words that, although not in an aggressive tone, were enough to trigger a small earthquake. After speaking of peace as the fruit of social justice, he arrived at the second pillar of his pontificate, the defense of the family. But it was not an abstract or nuanced speech. The pontiff precisely defined what the Church means by family, a stable and lasting communion between a man and a woman, open to life and founded on mutual giving. This was enough to spark a reaction from various sectors, both ecclesiastical and civil. Within the Church, some voices, notoriously inclined to the so-called pastoral update, have chosen a prudent, if not glacial, silence. Others, however, spoke openly of a step back, using polemical tones on online channels and progressive media. Outside the Vatican walls, the comments were even more heated. Some activists and commentators have accused Leo XIV of turning back the hands of the clock, evoking an anthropological vision that, they say, does not take into account the new social realities. But precisely on this point, the Pope was unequivocal. It is not, he said, an ideological or cultural battle, but rather fidelity to the truth about man and the original plan of the Creator. A truth that does not discriminate, but guides, that does not impose itself, but proposes, and that, above all, does not change with the variations of public consensus. His words, "The truth is a person, Christ," had a strong echo among those faithful who, for years, had felt marginalized for having simply reiterated what the Church has always taught. But not everyone shares the enthusiasm that erupted around the first acts of the pontificate of Pope Leo XIV. While on the one hand, many conservative circles and faithful linked to the Catholic tradition have welcomed with joy his words on family, truth, and unity, on the other hand, there is no lack of critical voices that invite caution. One of the strongest is that of Diogo Rafael Moreira, a well-known traditionalist commentator who warned his readers against what he calls a vain hope nurtured by those who believe they see in Leo a bulwark of the return to the faith of always. According to Moreira, the gestures and declarations of the new pontiff are still too ambiguous to be hailed as a true change of direction. In his opinion, Leo XIV was continuing with more reassuring tones the modernist program of his predecessor. The case of the canonization of Isaac of Nineveh would be the clearest proof of this. Isaac, in fact, belonged to the Church of the East, separated from Rome and opposed to the Council of Ephesus. His visions of hell and universal salvation have always been the object of strong criticism. Yet in 2024, Pope Francis made his liturgical memory official, and Leo XIV confirmed the decision without any reservation. This, according to Moreira, is not a negligible detail, but a clear sign of continuity with an ecumenical approach that tends to overcome dogmas in favor of an indistinct mysticism, closer to Gnostic sensibilities than to the Depositum Fidei. It is not, he says, a simple openness to dialogue, but a theology that empties the content of faith to replace it with subjective and transconfessional spiritual experiences. But the criticisms do not stop there. Again, according to Morera, the most serious mistake is not the popes, but the conservatives who, in order to find a foothold, rush to celebrate every gesture as if it were the definitive proof of a change of direction. The worst blind person is he who does not want to see, he says, denouncing a certain blind enthusiasm that ends up legitimizing what in other times would have been forcefully denounced. But contrary to what Morera says, even if the pontificate of Pope Leo XIV is just beginning, it cannot be denied that some of his gestures and words already mark a clear paradigm shift compared to the immediate past. The tone, the doctrinal references, the clarity of the language, everything suggests a desire to recover coherence and Catholic identity. However, prudence is needed. Discernment is needed. Above all, prayer is needed. Because true renewal requires time, solid roots, and constant fidelity. In a time marked by confusion and impulsive reactions, hope must not turn into blind enthusiasm, nor realism into cynicism. It is the time for industrious silence, watchful waiting, and trust in providence. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.